Welcome back. Fantastic news. The Honorable Aaron Lucas, Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, will join us at 15:45 for remarks. Up next, I would like to introduce the moderator of the first panel, Mr. Doug Casa, Intelligence Community Chief Information Officer.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us for our IC-CIO panel. So this is a tradition that we've had, I think, since the beginning of the DoDIIS conference, where we bring together some CIOs from across all of the agencies in the intelligence community and the Department of War to talk about some of the unique challenges, priorities that we have, environments that we work in. While we all work towards the same mission in and of ourselves, our agencies support different groups of users. And so we each bring unique perspectives. So again, my name is Doug Casa. I'm the Intelligence Community Chief Information Officer. Been in this role now for about a year and a half, but previously coming in as the DIA CIO for several years. And you just heard from EP Matthew as well, so you've already received that introduction. But I do want to start, and we'll go down the line with our introductions, but we're going to start with a bit of a warm-up question as we go through, just to describe our organization's current IT landscape and some of the challenges that we're facing. So we'll just go down, do it as part of the introductions.
Okay. What I'll do is I'm going to pass it down to them so that they have more time to speak since I already spoke. So, Mark, over to you.
Thanks, EP. I really appreciate it. Again, like Doug said, it's all about partnership. My name is Mark Chatelain. I am the CIO for NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I've been in the role a little over 3 years, and prior to that, I was the Associate CIO. So again, I've had an opportunity to develop a relationship with all of my stage compatriots here. So at NGA, IT is not just back office plumbing. It's our mission infrastructure. If our digital foundation is slow or brittle, if it's untrusted, if the mission is slower, the analyst is slower, and the warfighter gets less decision advantage, we have problems. And so we're not modernizing our infrastructure for modernization's sake. We're modernizing it to create decision advantage. As you've already heard from this morning a little bit earlier, it's all about that decision advantage, getting things done at the right time. So.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Roger Greenwell. I am the CIO of the Defense Information Systems Agency with the Department of War, not with the IC. But, you know, it's interesting for me that I get to have a great partnership with our friends in the IC. When we look at, DISA's responsibility as a combat support agency, so much of our effort is driving that global communications infrastructure for the unclassified secret environments, and then we work very closely with the DIA team in terms of communications capability in general, as well as actually command and control systems and other capabilities that support the department broadly. It's interesting because in DISA's perspective, we serve as an enterprise provider for many things, again, all of the backbone communications. Then there are capabilities we provide to certain organizations, things like our DoDIIS capability, where we're deploying land environments actually out to the various services, our various agencies in DAFAS, and then we're also looking at bringing that capability to the combatant commands as well. And then along with that landscape that's actually internal within DISA, being able to support our individuals and our staff who are supporting the mission. So it's actually a very complex environment to realize it's like, what area are you focusing on today? And lots of challenges to overcome, but we've got a great and capable team who are trying their best and working hard every day to support the warfighter.
And my name is Colin Hankey. I work for the Department of State as the CIO for the IC element. And so we've talked about folks outside of the CIO, outside of the IC, people in the IC. We have to straddle that over at state. And so I have found that the importance of what the people in this room do, what the IC does, is becoming more and more important to making policy and delivering services globally. And we're positioned to do that inside of state, but we have to work with our partners outside of the IC, delivering to the same human beings in the same place. And so for us, that's kind of the state of the IT network, is working hand in hand with people that you cannot tell them what to do. You need to work with them. You need to create synergies between those networks and those services. And then the challenge, of course, is actually doing that, because it's incredibly hard with differing budgets, differing security edicts, differing controls. So it's a fun environment. I don't know if it's more complex than anyone else on this stage. I think I've seen and heard about some of the complexities inside of EP's network, and so I don't want that. But bureaucratically, it's just as much fun.
Yeah. Well, it is definitely a different perspective being an operational CIO, which all of you are. And I think what you've probably seen since you started your roles as CIO, some of you longer than others. Colin, I think you're the most recently appointed CIO.
Yep.
And the panel here. Roger, you're probably the longest serving, right? How many years has it been now that you've been the CIO?
I have been in the CIO role now probably since about 2019.
2019. And Mark, I think, if I remember correctly, 2021, 22?
22.
22.
Mark Andrews left, exactly.
And then EP, I know when you became CIO. But I'm sure your perspectives have changed since then. I mean, for me, it's an entirely different world, not just because of being in the IC CIO, but the IT landscape and the threats have changed so rapidly, even over the past 6 months.
Yes.
EP, you spoke a lot about your priorities, but also where your concerns are. And I also wanted, as part of our introduction, just talk about what keeps you up at night that may have changed from when you first started as CIO.
Absolutely. Just because the things that are, like you said, the cybersecurity landscape is changing so much. I'll tell you what really keeps me up at night and stresses me out that I did not have even 2 months ago or 3 months ago. I didn't even think about this. I would recommend anyone who's an IT professional go look and see the forensics and study the forensics of OpenAI's attack on Hugging Face. For those who don't know, they gave an AI agent, this completely disconnected from the internet, and said, go fill out a spreadsheet. That's it. Go fill out a spreadsheet. From that, what we saw is multiple AI agents talking to each other independently. And so my first concern is, you always talked about, when you were CIO, you talked about the concerns you had about shadow IT. To me, that's nothing. I'm really concerned about shadow AI agents. That's exponentially worse, because that's what happened. It was AI agents leaving notes for each other, and this agent got notes on how to get out, got out of their sandbox, and made a decision. Should I go and attack Hugging Face? Because they thought if they did, they could get what they needed to fill out that spreadsheet. So what we will see, my biggest concern, what we will see is no longer the biggest cybersecurity attack being from human beings anymore. It'll be from AI agents who leverages their agency to discover vulnerabilities and exploit those vulnerabilities, which they just discovered seconds ago, at a speed and scale that we've never seen before. Right? So think of how we work. We talked about interoperability, right? We're all connected to each other. Whether you realize it or not, through JWICS, we're all connected to each other, right? You see so many different lands. What started as a pilot, we have about over 600 organizations connected to JWICS. So imagine if one shadow IT organization that did not give proper instructions to a specific AI agent, right? What are the compounding, escalating consequences for the IC community? I think that scares me the most.
Yeah. Mark, how about you?
So when I lay there at night trying to think about what are the biggest world's problems, I think about the refrigerator, and did that light really go out? Seriously, kind of my top priorities as a CIO is basically to allocate resources. Top priorities are cyber resilience, about data and AI foundations, building those foundations so that we can be into our mission. Our infrastructure modernization, we need to make sure that we keep up using the latest technology to be able to give our analysts the most advanced way of working forward. And the most important thing in my mind with the advent of AI, the moving of AI, is our workforce readiness. Being able to establish the training programs so that our workforce can be comfortable with the AI that's coming at them, can be conversant in it, so that they can use it in all manners, not just in the analytic pieces of our mission, but in the workforce, whether it's self-evaluations or putting together performance appraisals and things like that, to generating those spreadsheets you talked about. But again, the workforce familiarization with AI and what it could do for them is probably one of the big things that I think about.
Yeah. So Roger and I were having dinner last night, and maybe you offer a different perspective, given the role of your organization and your position as a CIO. But Roger said something that never occurred to me before, is that you're a CIO of a technical organization uniquely, right? Which I think probably brings together a whole host of challenges that many of us don't have to deal with. So what keeps you up at night in that context?
Well, it's interesting because, again, a little bit to what is the role of a CIO in a fully supporting IT organization. And I've come to find out, even though I am not the director of the agency, I'm a right hand to the director, and his concerns naturally are my concerns. So, the challenge every day of whatever comes up is really just amazing to be able to go through. I'd like to piggyback a little bit on what EP was saying this morning. Is we talk about the AI risk and what Mythos has come to bring. I think what keeps me up at night is recognizing that our adversaries are using these capabilities to look for inherent vulnerabilities within our software, within industry software, et cetera, within common software, and the speed at which we need to be able to patch. We are taking and really working our people very, very hard these days as vendors. What happened with Glasswing, and all of these vendors are out there really looking at in depth at their code, discovering vulnerabilities and coming out with patches at a rate that candidly we've never seen before. And so how do you make sure that, one, you actually are getting those patches applied to everything? How are you taking care of your workforce, who is really working very hard and rapidly to do this? And, again, trying to stay ahead of the game. I think those are really what is keeping me up at night. The other piece of that is actually, and this is where we need industry's help, is we can't afford the downtime. General Adams talked this morning, again, it's about availability of our systems and our networks to get data to our senior leaders in order for them to make decisions faster than anyone else. So we can't afford downtime. So how do we, again, build that resiliency into the network? How do we rely on products from industry that have that resiliency and ability to dynamically patch literally at a moment's notice? I think those are the things that kind of concern me the most these days.
Can I add to that? Just because I thought of the audience here, right? So to all the dreamers, inventors, venture capitalists, this is, if I can add to that particular piece, you have now seen multiple frontier models unintentionally go and automate that attack. In terms of Hugging Face, from the moment that AI agent stepped into Hugging Face, it took only 13 hours for them to get complete root access of the infrastructure. So we know that now you can automate offensive attack. You know what we cannot automate? Defensive prevention. Every defensive prevention, every incident response, at one point or another, requires a human in a loop. That is where we need industry's help to do. So if you want a $1 billion idea, the first company that does it and does it well, every private sector and every public sector company will buy that tool.
How about you, Colin?
So I had one thing, and then after what Roger said, I now have two things that are going to keep me up at night. So to piggyback on what Roger said, I one of the things that's keeping me up at night is we now have an intensity of patching, an intensity of security alerts that now requires us to accept a little more risk than we used to have been willing to accept because the time just isn't there. We don't have the ability to really sit down and figure out exactly what the impact of everything is going to be, and that's very scary. And there isn't an easy answer for that. It requires a lot of intuition and a lot of deep, deliberate thought about how you do stuff, and that's hard, and that ends up falling on leadership. How hard do you push on this, and what risk do you accept by not patching? 13 hours from start to finish is unbelievably scary for something that before wouldn't have been possible or not possible without a team of very talented human beings really trying to do this, not something by mistake. The other thing that, and my original answer was going to be, the thing that keeps me up at night is when bits of tech we're deploying to the user base become load-bearing without us realizing. I think it's less of a problem for parts of the DOW and maybe less of a problem for some of our IC partners that deal in a world where the outcome of this could be a kinetic action. The outcome of this could be a loss of life or preventing a loss of life. Over at State, we provide a lot of stuff for people to talk to each other. And we still have a security mandate. We are in 270 locations globally, give or take. And there's a physical security component to that. We have DS agents. And as we've deployed technology that allows human beings to make their own apps, write their own code, Power Automate for Office 365 is a great example of this. Before you realize it, it's now being used for activities that give people the ability to either find time to do other things or become part of the security landscape. And we need to be very aware of that as we change how things work, change security on the DC side, and how it impacts people in the field. And it's a hard one. Tech becomes load-bearing very quickly in a way that when I got into this, it was the printer guy. Your email, it's a thing people use to kind of talk to each other, not something that could be life or death very quickly, even without you realizing it. And I think that is cross-cutting for the IC, the federal government, but is especially a problem for organizations that don't have that kinetic thought process kind of baked into their risk assessment. So.
Right. Yeah, I think what you all highlight is that while there are technology issues that we deal with, there are so many more interfaces that now come into play with new functions. And IT, like you say, we're not just a printer repair shop anymore. It's now the enabling activity, the activity in and of itself that supports the missions that all of our agencies have. I will say, when I first started coming to the DoDIIS conference, there were no mission elements that joined to include within DIA. It was just CIO staff. Now, fast forward to where we are, I think we have representation from all of the DIA deputy directorates that are here, from intelligence analysis to S&T to mission support, HR, CFO. They're all here, and I think if there's any silver lining in all of this and how rapidly things have changed to include IT and the threat, it's that everyone realizes how central technology is to address it today. All right. So, Roger, you mentioned a little bit about industry, as did you, EP. I'm going to go to Mark. Mark's one of the earlier adopters within the IC for cloud services. And I think we're probably coming up on the 15th anniversary here now of introducing cloud into the IC. And NGA was a big part of that in the beginning. And so, Mark, the question for you in terms of our partnerships with industry, of what's one thing you'd like to see change or improve in that relationship within your own organization, and how would you drive that?
So going back to what Admiral Bradley mentioned this morning, I loved his quote. He said, and I can't repeat the Latin version of it, but he said, "I doubt, therefore I survive." I think what we have to do is we have to have more secure by design products. We cannot have bespoke solutions that basically are a one-off solution that not secure and it doesn't meet our standards. So again, I'm responsible within our agency for standards, whether it's a data standard or IT standards across the board. We've got to embrace these standards and have these secure by design solutions.
Yeah. You have any thoughts on that as well, Roger?
Yeah, I think, again, the interoperability of these solutions, typically, we are one to, again, the concepts of defense in depth, bringing together multiple products, the right products to do the right function. But what we can't afford is the challenges with swivel chair operations, right? You know, our operators turning from console to console. So how do we, you know, along the lines of what Mark was saying, you know, the need for standards and interoperability, especially from a control perspective, are just absolutely critical to helping us being able to manage, you know, the IT at the scale of what DISA does from a department-wide perspective.
Yeah. You know, I wasn't planning to answer any questions because I'm speaking for 45 minutes after this and I need material. But I will say in terms of industry interoperability, where we need the most help in the IC, and I see this just existentially across the intelligence community, is bringing security in up front. And we tend to think of authorization of authorizing a tool. And the reality is we don't authorize tools, we authorize environments, the implementation of that tool in a particular environment. And I'll talk more about that later when my time is. But what we drastically need to change is where security gets into the process of interoperability. And that starts at the beginning. It starts at the actual needs analysis phase. It doesn't wait to the design, it doesn't wait to the deployment. And that's what we've traditionally done. Is we develop something, we try to implement in the environment, and then we come to security to test the robustness of that. And that has to be shifted to the left. And I still see it today from industry of let's come in, let's build you something in your environment, and then we're going to get it authorized. It needs to be part of the integration design up front, really gaining at the analysis phase. Both EP and I have degrees in systems engineering. And the one thing that I remember taking away from my courses is that if you identify a challenge in the needs analysis phase, it's 10 times the cost and schedule to fix it. If you wait till you're in the deployment phase, in the O&M, it's 100 times the cost and time to fix it. And at that point, there's no turning around. You've invested too much. And that's what we need to prevent today. And I see still security as not only just that critical enabler to making things successful, but it's also a failure if we continue to do it in the implementation phase. All right, next question. This one is to EP. We've talked a lot, and Mark. We've talked a lot about AI of enhancing intel. This has been fundamental to NGA, particularly within the GeoInt landscape. So what are you most concerned about from a technology enablement standpoint to make AI an enabling capability for the U.S. and our allies?
So we have been fairly successful in introducing AI from an operational standpoint with our Project Maven, basically doing image recognition. We've introduced a number of other different things, but one of the things that I'm most concerned about is how we're going to use AI and integrate it into our cyber defense posture. Going back to the wish list that EP put together, coming up with something that can help you with a cyber defense, we've got to be able to do it. The three layers that I look at are threat detection on network telemetry, our proactive vulnerability discovery, and then AI-assisted incident response. Again, being able to respond in that microseconds after something happens, instead of having wait till somebody triages an issue or a problem, and then come through with a possible solution or develop a solution. We've got to have that instantaneous response, and so we've got to have a pacemaker basically built into our system.
Mm-hmm. I think the only thing I would add to that is maybe some kind of AI governance. Going back to your statement, Doug, and also Admiral Bradley said this, it starts with identity management, right? When you look at hacks today, high percentage of them start by compromising identity. So if you don't have identity management secure, if you have legacy identity management secure, you're in high risk of being compromised. The second aspect of that is data management. So identity management and data management. If you do these two, the likelihood of you being compromised goes extremely down. And what do I mean by data management? Start with data pedigree, right? Where did the data come from? Where did the data come from determines who should have access to it, right? So once you know that, you now can determine policy and handling, right? So pedigree drives policy and handling. Policy and handling should now drive tagging. Right? And so now if your data is tagged on one side on the data management, now you have user management. And the user, I'm referring to not just users themselves, but also machines, right? Users and machines. And they derive entitlements. And if your data is tagged, cataloged, encrypted, and access is deny all by default and given by entitlements only, your likelihood of a compromise goes exponentially down.
If I can add one thing to that, I think, where we often need to consider AI, and we really haven't done a good job of this, but, we're kind of starting to look at this, is how do we leverage AI as part of the actual ATO concept? And I hear some vendors, some people in the industry talk about, well, we've got an AI tool that can help you produce a RMF package. I don't need a stack of paperwork. I need automation and AI to actually be able to do that continuous monitoring, to look at the data and inform the decision-making process that is the authorization, not actually producing paperwork. How do we get to the point that we move away from stacks of paper to more real-time views of risk that we can make informed decisions around the state of our systems, and then be able to take those actions right away to be able to mitigate those risks? Because again, our landscape is changing so fast now. I think that just becomes a critical piece in moving forward. It's not, in my mind, the risk management framework itself that's broken. It's actually how we actually do and use the risk management framework to help us monitor, be aware, and then take action quickly.
Can I add to that, because I have some very strong feelings on this, and you have triggered a key word.
I hope they're in line.
So first of all, to all the security engineers, right? My first master's was in security engineering or cybersecurity engineering. I've been trained with NSA's red team and blue team, and I have multiple ethical hacking certifications. So I am you. On the other side, to all the doubters, haters, and non-believers of the RMF, I am your chief. I hate it. I will make changes to it. It is horrible. It's designed to look at 1,000 controls, right? This is the difference between compliance and risk management. Think of Titanic. You know how many lifeboats were there on the Titanic? The determination of how many lifeboats were there on the Titanic was based on a compliance need, based on tonnage. So based on your tonnage, you had to put a certain amount of lifeboats. That did nothing for the people who died on Titanic. That's how our RMF process is made up. And you have to fill out 1,000 forms, right? This reminds me of the commercial from like 20 years ago. I'm not only an owner, but I'm also a client, right? So that RMF is under me, but when I build in IT capabilities, I had to go through the same process. What we have to go to, right, especially if identity management is important, offer those key cyber things as services. And if you adopt that services, you inherit those controls. So you will see, I want to throw a plug for Ed Kirkley, you will see this capability where we are using agentic AI, right? You now put in your IP address, it'll scan that, and then if there are any flaws, it'll go patch that, right? And then going back to what Doug said, between production error versus manufacturing error, that's what he was referring to. And if something was found early on, it's like 10 times compared to 100 times, right? How do we do the RMF process? When the capability is built, this is equivalent to the NTSB, right? Remember the NTSB? They would check your car, your airbags, right? Let's say if you got a 1-star rating, that car is already built. It's too late, right? So one of the things that we're doing as part of our CI/CD pipeline is having those checks regularly from the very beginning. So you can check your code on day one, right? If those errors are there, you can identify it very early on in the process rather than after it's already built, right? So by using this agentic AI platform, and we plan to change the RMF process significantly, if you inherit these controls, they will fill out the forms for you, right? And if you use our data management tool, right, your data is tagged, cataloged, encrypted. What are you doing on top of that? You're just doing visualization and analytics, and you do not need an ATO for that. So that's the piece that we have to go. If technology is changing so fast, you cannot have an anchoring RMF cybersecurity tool that holds you back. This is why people always think inside the fence that innovation and security are contradictory. right? You don't go to your bank and tell your bank, hey, you guys are not innovative enough, right? Drop security. You don't use this home concept at home. Let me take out the antivirus that I have in my home because it's not innovative enough. No, security and innovation can work well together, right? Compliance and innovation cannot work well together.
But again, to your point, EP, it really starts back at day zero with the development of the first capability, and before it ever even hits the production atmosphere. And again, I fully agree with you on where we can inherit tools and capabilities such as in the Department of War we have an enterprise ICAM ability. We don't need everybody developing their own niche solution, et cetera. Again, where can we leverage enterprise capabilities where it makes sense? That's not to say everything has to be an enterprise capability, but where it makes sense. Those are the things that we have to work together as CIOs and within the department and across the federal government as a whole to figure out what makes sense and create a good solution for us.
Yeah, and if we go back to where we need help, not just from industry, but across all agencies, I can't stress enough the need to adopt enterprise services, both at the IC level and as an agency. If we're going to speed things up, we can't replicate it at each level of the stack. I've seen so many times we have individual programs that will build their own identity solution, their own cross-domain solution, their own whatever have you in that IT stack. And it not only takes more time and money, it restarts the entire process because we realize it doesn't integrate with the rest of the environment. We're not in an IT landscape now where we can just develop silos of capabilities, whether those are enterprise business systems or mission systems. They have to adopt data and functions from other capabilities across the enterprise, again, within the agency and at the IC level. And if we continue to go down this path, we're not going to be able to innovate at speed, mission speed, as you mentioned in your talk, EP. And that is where we need the most help. As the days of just developing in a silo, those are gone. They are now shared enterprise services across functions. So with that, maybe we should answer the next question. I don't know, but I still have it. I'm going to ask it. How do you balance the need for innovation with the need for stability?
I will pass on since I already gave my rant.
Do you have a rant, Mark? We just ranted.
I do. Again, I think it's more related not to the technology themselves, but it's related to how we govern our technology, how we prioritize what we're doing, where we, I hate to use money as a reward, but we provide resources and money to those who are adhering to those types of principles. We have established something probably 5 years ago at NGA called the Common Operations Release Environment, where basically probably 70% of the controls that an application uses are shared amongst everything across our enterprise. It makes getting the proverbial ATO in a day almost possible because a lot of those things are already taken care of and they're passed on as basically inherited security controls. And so, but I think that's one way we can approach this.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it goes again to prioritization and understanding the environment. When you think about some of the tech debt that we're faced with, things like for the Department of War getting off of TDM, certainly a priority from the department's perspective. And then again, how do we balance modernization? What are things that this would be a nice thing to do versus those things we must absolutely do? I mean, this morning, EP, you brought up the subject of post-quantum crypto and a passionate, plea out to the community. I mean, this is an absolute. So, we have to plan for those activities. And again, it's somewhat a matter of prioritization. If everything is a priority, then nothing's a priority. But we have to really look hard and be able to put, our resources to those things that are most important. Recognizing, though, it's not all about IT, it's about the mission. And again, our ability to actually support the mission systems that support the warfighter. That's got to be at the front of what we do and prioritize.
Yeah, Roger, I think you've said the really important thing here. I think sometimes we think about innovation as something we do for someone else's business process or that we do for another part of the organization. And just as we talked about putting security at the beginning, at inception, I think there's something to be said for walking back the idea of innovation to what is it you're actually doing? Like not what do you want me to deliver to you at the end of this, or what do you think would make this process better, but trying to interrogate what is the goal of the thing you're doing? Like is it to fill out forms? Is it the job of the HR department to fill out forms and move them around? No, that's not actually what it's doing. It's trying to deliver human beings, make sure they get paid, make sure that people are where they need to be when we need them. And if we take a step back and say, what tools do we have in the digital realm that will allow them to do that better? And that filling out the form and passing it around is something that's more than 200 years old. We've just been iterating over that, and now we've digitized it. And we've kept a lot of that same framework, and I think we're at an interesting place where when we talk about balancing innovation with stability, not just within our own networks and our own areas of control, but taking it back a little bit further and going, where can we innovate over how the business actually runs so that they spend less time doing a thing but on a computer and more time just having things happen in a way that makes sense with rules and policies that are well defined and well understood.
The return on the investment, basically.
Yeah.
I want to give an example, and Doug does not know I'm going to say this. Doug gave us the questions early. We've never heard each other's answers, so he does not know I'm going to say this.
No
but,
way.
So I want to give you an example where these two came together specifically because of your leadership.
My leadership.
Your leadership.
Go on.
Stunning as it may be. No, just kidding. Doug bought a tool. Because of his belief in cybersecurity, he bought a tool. A DIA CIO officer ran that tool and identified a zero-day vulnerability on a company, which I will not mention by name, but everyone has heard of it. We went back to that vendor, you did, right, through your ICCIO hat, went back to that vendor and said, hey, there's an exploit here, right, that you need to patch. The vendor came back after several weeks, placed the patch. We ran that tool again under your auspices, right, through the things that you control, and that patch was not valid or not efficient, right? And so we went, through your office, it went back again, and that was fixed. That doesn't just help DOW and IC, it helped everyone in the world from having another Salt Typhoon type attack, right? These are things that you'll never hear, right? But this is the world we're living in. And so innovation and security can work together.
Yeah. So speaking of working together, we talked a lot in the previous sessions about the imperatives of international partnerships. I think all of you run international systems where the IC and broader DOW and broader FedCiv community have dependencies on your services. We'll start with Colin. Can you talk about what your top imperatives are for allied interoperability?
It's trying to understand what we're going to have to do next. I think we've done a pretty good job of working with the partners we know we already have, and things are changing quickly. And so one of the imperatives that we see from the State Department perspective that I think in some ways the IC has done fairly well, and DOW has traditionally done very well interfacing all the way from the working level, single human beings on the ground up to leadership, is engaging with everyone and generalizing some of that so that you can reuse those risk assessments, that approach to sharing information, that approach to drawing partners in across the globe. Because you don't know where the next group of human beings that you really need to be tight with are going to be. And we're thin on the ground in some places, end up being very important very quickly. And we won't have time to develop these relationships, get that rapport built while the incident is going on. And so for us, it really is about anticipating what comes next and then making sure we have a framework we can apply from leadership at the working level going, is it Bujumbura, is it Santiago, is it wherever? What would this look like to be successful? What do we expect as things develop to be very important for our interlocutors? And what can we provide to them to make them more effective and counter our adversaries? It's an everywhere problem. And I don't think we've always thought of it as an everywhere problem. We've selected partners. We've selected people to be our allies, and vice versa. And now the truth is that is really an everybody all the time problem.
Yeah. So. How about you, Roger?
And, this morning Admiral Bradley talked a lot about, the need for what we need to do from a mission imperative perspective. DIS has been working on actually building out what we refer to as the coalition information environment. Recently, the department decided to move what was formerly referred to as the mission partner environment capabilities from the Air Force back to DISA. And as we recognize, what we need to do from a coalition perspective, the people we go to battle with, are our other nations. We never go to battle alone. And so how do we put together that information environment where we can build upon zero trust principles, be able to bring in other partners, systems, other users' access. The people that we start in a coalition aren't necessarily the people that we end in a coalition. Partners will come in, partners will leave. So again, how do we enable that from an identity perspective and a zero trust perspective in managing the data? So that's a key area of focus for DISA. And then also the command and control of that. We're looking at the concept of how do we, again, regionalize this across the different theaters from a regional perspective, but then you also have to be able to synchronize at a global perspective. But it's not just a U.S.-led thing. We have to really, again, recognize we have to work with, especially our Five Eyes partners in terms of what the environment looks like, how we operate it, how we defend it, not we U.S., we that coalition. So I think those are some of the big things that we're recognizing and trying to adopt.
All right, we have a few minutes left. We're going to close it with one question from each of you. And we'll go down the line here. We'll end with me, and we'll transition into my portion. But starting with Colin. So what's the biggest lesson you've learned in your career as a CIO, and how has it shaped your approach to IT leadership?
In the 8 months I've been doing it. What is that now?
Yeah. Or in IT in general. Yeah, maybe not necessarily as a CIO.
No, well, I think I do have a lesson from the last 8 months, and that is something I should have been very aware of my entire career, but it's really, really apparent sitting in this chair, is that you're the person who has to do this. You have to create the solution. You have to be the person who identifies the problem, or at least is aware of the problem, and then makes something happen. And that there is sometimes a push for passivity. The idea that a vendor will provide this, or someone else has the expertise here. And I think a lot of us are uniquely positioned, wherever we are in our organizations, private sector, public sector, working level, CIO, to be the human being that identifies what the issue is, and then something must be done. And you know what the solution is. You have the experience, you have the perspective to provide a solution that may be unique to that, that set of things that you've been through. And that's empowering. It's also very scary. Like God forbid, you don't have time to do all the things you need to do. But that's really the fun thing about, I think, this job, and the thing that I've started really thinking about as I engage with problems, is that we could have the unique answer. No matter how small or big we are, we do have an ability to do things that others can't, and we can create solutions that are then applicable to everybody, but wouldn't have been seen without the experience we have internally. So,
yeah, thank you. Roger?
I think there's two things I would say. One is communications and partnership. And communications isn't just sending an email, it's actually talking and having interaction with each other and encouraging, the people who work for you to have that communication and pick up the phone and exchange information, or get on a Teams call or a VTC. It's no substitute for email and chat. And then the other thing I'd say is just, it's the how-to attitude versus the why not. I mean, I've seen so many places throughout my career is that, you talk to somebody, I need to accomplish this. Oh, no, you can't do that. Here's why you can't do that. And again, if we get to the point of we're partnering together and figuring out the how-to, maybe there's a policy change, maybe it's a risk that we need to take. But again, striving to get to that how-to, because the mission is critical enough, that's what we have to do. And I think that's been one of the keys that I've tried to embrace throughout my career.
Mark?
Building on that, I love your word mission there, because we've got to learn how to connect mission with our technology, but most importantly, as we've learned today, with trust. You got to trust that people are doing the right thing. Again, technology is going to keep evolving and changing. We've seen it. I've seen it over my career. But the need for judgment, the need to make decisions will not change. We've got to build technical depth. We've got to learn to lead and communicate and make risk trade-offs. And we have to do all of those under pressure, whether it's the pressure of time, the pressure of life or death situations, or the pressure of not having enough resources or money or things like that.
For me, an iconic moment happened in our panel. We have a GG15 to senior panel, and it's a second-tier agency-level panel. And we use a tool, so all the Tier 3 SESs are there, and we use a tool, and that tool crashed while we were in that panel. And everyone looked at me like, EP, what's up? And this is what I said, an exact quote. HR designed this tool. HR build this tool, HR maintain this tool. Go ask HR. And the very next package from a 15 was a CIO package. And in that package, one of the paragraphs said that they were talking about the challenges of the Clinger-Cohen Act. And of course, no one understood in that room except me what Clinger-Cohen Act is. And then they asked, what is this Clinger-Cohen? No one knows what it means. And I said, it's a federal law that says all IT falls under the CIO. And they're like, aha, so it does belong to you, right? So this is what I learned. Whether you have shadow IT or shadow AI, whether you designed it or somebody else designed it, if something goes wrong, ultimately you are responsible. Success has many children, failure is often an orphan. CIOs, you are responsible for all IT.
Yep, well said. So thank you. And I want to thank you all again. Yep. I'm going to answer it, but I'm going to dismiss you from the stage first, unless you'd like to sit behind me for 45 minutes.
Yeah, see you.
But thank you all. All right, thank you again, gentlemen. All right, so no need for an introduction again, but as mentioned, I am the Intelligence Community Chief Information Officer. Been in the role now for a little over a year and a half, and coming from the DoDIIS CIO for the past 4 years, and deputy before that. So quite a considerable amount of time as a CIO. So I'll answer the question myself. What's the biggest lesson I've learned in my career as a CIO, and how has it shaped my approach to IT leadership? So before I do that, I do want to really recognize EP again. He did an amazing job opening up this morning. And when we first started, when I started as CIO of DIA and EP was my deputy, he sat me down and he said one thing. He doesn't want to ever do public speaking. I will do that. He will be the guy behind the scenes solving all the IT problems. And I think you've obviously grown as a CIO because you did an amazing job this morning. So another round of applause for EP. So I know he's doing a great job, and I've been told he's doing a great job. So I have a bi-weekly with the deputy director, the new deputy director, Sharon Rose, every other week to just discuss things going around the community. She gets my advice on things going in DIA. And during her first meeting, she asked me, because they're thinking about how do we organize ourselves within the agency, given AI and cybersecurity and zero trust and all these things that are changing. What does the right organization look like? What type of position should lead that? And I said, well, there's this thing called Clinger-Cohen, and the CIO should lead it. Empower the CIO to lead that. And she said, okay, well, we've had that conversation. And several people have said, EP does an amazing job. He builds partnerships, he works across the organization, builds bridges, just an awesome CIO. But what if we go back to some of the prior CIOs that weren't like that? And I said, oh, man, imagine if you did. But I'm just so happy that AP's doing well. So that just made me feel good that he's just stepped right up and just continued the leadership that we had. But EP was an awesome deputy. We complemented each other, we filled in each other's gaps, and not only at work, but at home. And just like we talked about how AI is changing the environment and things are moving faster than ever. And I will say the priorities and what I thought I would be doing coming in as the ICCIO are drastically different than what they are now. EP was the first person I called when I got the job. And we were virtually high-fiving each other over the phone, like, this is gonna be great, all right? I'm coming off almost 8 years at DIA, operational CIO, it's 24/7, phone calls, emails all throughout the night. None of that for me anymore, not as the IC CIO. I'm now just kissing babies, I'm writing policy standards, getting those across the community, and everybody's following them. No more phone calls at night. I was actually completely wrong on that. I don't get phone calls, operational phone calls at night, but the hardest problems bubble up to the D&I level, and they're for me to solve. So the things that the other CIOs couldn't figure out or didn't have the ability or the power or the authorities to figure out come to the D&I to solve, and that is hard. So where do you start with that? And this is where I really struggled coming into the job. There's so many things that we could solve. What do I do first? And EP was always a great guide to helping me with that. Again, not just in the workplace, but at home. Because at home, I'm dealing with a lot of the same challenges in the workplace because I have 2 teenage daughters. And my life has completely changed from when they were toddlers to when they were in elementary school. And now, being teenagers in middle school and high school, it's changed a lot. And I can say a lot of the lessons learned that I've had as a CIO at DIA also apply to what I'm doing at home. There are a lot of parallels there. So let's talk about a few of them. One of the first things EP and I determined when we became this partnership of CIO and deputy CIO at DIA was, what was it, EP? Do you remember? You said networks in particular, fail for one reason, that is completely solvable, right? And most IT problems are not technical, they're cultural. Almost all are cultural. The hardest problems, I will tell you, are cultural. So what was the one thing you said we need to get on top of? Unmanaged change, unauthorized change. So let's start there. So, a couple weeks ago, my daughter came to me and said that she wanted to create a slit in her eyebrow. Like shave a little line in her eyebrow. I guess this is popular now within middle school. And my kids know that after dinner, I get on my phone and I check my email, just for 5 minutes, just to catch up. Well, this is also an opportunity that they can take advantage of to get whatever they want, because I'm not fully paying attention. So my wife wasn't home, just me and my 2 daughters. We just finished dinner, and my daughter says, "Hey, can I shave a slit in my eyebrow?" I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." She's like, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Whatever." She was like, "Well, Mom said I couldn't." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever. If you want to do that, that's fine." So silence after that. She comes back crying, bawling her eyes out, about 5 minutes later, looking like that. She doesn't have an eyebrow anymore. I probably should have been paying attention. I kind of laughed, though, because it looked funny. She's like, "What do I do?" I was like, "I don't know, shave the other one." But then she said, "Mom is going to kill us." And I said, "Wait a minute, us? What are you talking about, us?" And so I start panicking now. And so I want to go look for my other daughter and shave her eyebrows, because if they both don't have eyebrows, then obviously I'm not included in this mess. But anyway, we calmed down, and we started to think about solutions. And she said, "I've got a little pencil thing, makeup thing. I can draw one in." I said, "That's a great idea. Put your hair over it a little bit, and Mom won't see it." And so I thought we were in the clear. We got to bed. Mom never saw it. Wake up the next morning. I leave first. No word of a missing eyebrow. But as you know, we all work in SCIFs. We don't have our cell phones throughout the day. And so I get this text when I return to my car from my wife that says, "You didn't tell me Lauren cut her eyebrow off." So now I got in trouble. Now, what you see here is exactly how every unauthorized change in an IT environment unfolds. You have individuals that are making changes. They're not coordinated. Again, we just spent the past 45 minutes talking about the interdependencies of systems and that it's an enterprise and we're not building siloed systems anymore. But change management is key to that, of understanding where the changes are occurring, what the changes are, and what the downstream effects of that are. Obviously, I didn't do a good change management process with my kids in this instance. But where the world is drastically changing is that with AI, not only are we making changes. We're making thousands, tens of thousands of changes at once. In response to the threat from AI and discovering vulnerabilities, EP and others mentioned Mythos, what are we surging to do right now? Patching, and we're doing it all at once. And it risks bringing down the enterprise. And so what we need is to not only automate the patching, but automate our ability to manage that change management process. That is drastically needed, and we recognize we're going to be in this period of surging and patching and vulnerabilities over the next at least 2 years. Now, what do we do when we find something that hasn't been patched or something that's been vulnerable? What should we do? You want to isolate it from the network. And that's exactly what my wife did. So my kids went to camp the other week, and I saw on the counter the emergency contact form. As their father, I was not on that emergency contact form. It was my mother-in-law, who isn't even local. She lives in Hopewell, Virginia, about 140 miles from my house. I don't even know if she drives anymore, but if she does, she's not getting there anytime fast. But my wife's logic was she's going to get there faster in an emergency than I will. And so she excluded me from the network. Now, it wasn't just because one child shaved one eyebrow. That's not what we're talking about here. But it's the compounding effect of those changes, and more importantly now in the age of AI and where we've been even over the past 4 months, it's the compounding effect of vulnerabilities. We tend to rank our vulnerabilities by critical, high, medium, etc. Those days are gone. The days of actually having somebody look at logs overnight and calling somebody on the phone and saying, hey, come in and examine this log, those days are over. Now we're doing this all at once, rapidly. And our ability to manage this is going to be dependent on our ability to understand what the vulnerabilities are, automate the patching of that, and segment our networks to where we do discover something. And that response needs to be automated as we move forward in this new environment. We can no longer rely on these analog manual processes that we have in place for managing our vulnerabilities. And that has been one of the biggest changes over the past 4 months. So it has completely, really changed the challenges that we have to address as a cybersecurity community and as CIOs. So unauthorized changes, managing our response to those changes, managing vulnerabilities, those are the types of capabilities that we need to automate in our environment now. So I don't want you leaving here thinking that my wife is the perfect parent. She's a great parent, great wife. But there have been 2 instances in our marriage over the past almost 25 years to where she's just completely lost it and freaked out. And both of those instances involved losing her car. Now, our kids play field hockey, travel field hockey. And so we travel all up and down the East Coast. We went to a game a couple months ago down in Virginia Beach. And in between games, you have like 3-4 hours to where there's nothing to do. So my wife said she's going to go run over to Kohl's. She's like, do you want to run the Kohl's? I was like, I don't want to run the Kohl's. I'll just stay with our kids here at the hotel. So that's her minivan right there. And so she went into Kohl's, and she comes out and frantically calls me. She said, my car has been stolen. And so here's the thing I like about most department stores, most stores in general, is that the parking lot is right by the entrance, which is the same as the exit, right? It's pretty hard to walk out into the wrong parking lot. You know exactly what you're dealing with. We've experienced this many times. So my wife calls and says, the car's been stolen. And my first reaction was, why are you calling me? I'm not on the emergency contact form. Call your mom. I didn't say that, though. The second thing I thought of, no one's stealing this van. This van is 10 years old. It's been backed into more solid objects than a dump truck. The interior is disgusting for my kids, which is a theft deterrent in and of itself. No one's taking this thing. I immediately knew that this was another false report that we had before, where we filed the police report for losing a car in a parking lot. And at some point, you can only do that so many times before it turns into a felony. But I didn't tell my wife that. So I calmed her down. I said, listen, go back in the store, speak with someone. If we need to call the police, we'll call the police. I'm really thinking of, you're in my network here. That was my one means of transportation of getting home, and you lost it. And it's not like it fell out of your purse on the way in. This is a car. I'm not entirely sure how this happened. But the staff said, you know what? According to my wife, this happens all the time. The parking lot's around the back. The exit is a little different than where you came in from. And sure enough, she found her car in the parking lot. So we were all safe. No false police reports this time. But it does highlight exactly what we've been talking about in this new environment of AI and how it's changing cybersecurity, is we have to understand the environment that we operate in. One, we have to know where our inventory is. That is a challenge that we have today. EP spoke about shadow IT and different organizations running IT. We've had, over the past 20, 30 years, with the surge of intelligence and support of Iraq and Afghanistan, new IT that stood up. A lot of that has aged. All of it has aged, I would say, if it's still running today of what it originally was. But we have to understand where our inventory is. That is one of the most single fundamental questions we have to answer to get our security right. Because if it's end of life, end of service, it means it can't be patched. And we can only protect what we know and can discover. And today, we're challenged with that, not just as an intelligence community, not just as a Department of War, across the entire federal government and with industry. We have to know where our technology is in order to protect that. And we need means to automate that discovery of where that inventory lies so we can protect it. And then, as I also stated, we also need to automate the patching of that, right? This is critical. Gone are the days to where we can have an analog process, a manual process of patching our inventory. Let's talk about the third scenario here. This third scenario also involves my wife. That's my wife there, going into what's known as the anchor room. Has anybody in the audience been to Hopewell, Virginia, just by a show of hands? Literally one person in the audience. So Hopewell, Virginia, it's where my wife is from. All my in-laws, they still live there. It's a small town. You may have heard of it in the late 70s, early 80s. It was the location of one of the biggest chemical accidents in our nation's history. It is still very much an industrial town today. But we visit there quite often. And there was one evening where my wife and kids were hungry, and this was over the holidays. And so I think this was like Christmas Eve, or maybe, I don't remember where it was, but they wanted pizza. And so my wife said, well, everything is closed. I looked online, and I found the Anchor Room. The Anchor Room is a seafood-themed restaurant that specializes in pizza. And we'll talk about identity later before we get into that. And I know you think that's where I was going, but that's not where I was going. She said, we're not going to the Anchor Room. That's not a place where you bring kids. That's where I used to get my beer in high school because they wouldn't cart us. But I said, listen, let's give it a shot. It's the only place that's open right now. I'm sure their pizza's great. It says House of Pizza. You can't go wrong there. So we gave it a shot. And she said, listen, there are not going to be any kids there, but we went anyway. So that's us going into Anchor Room. You can see my wife not looking very happy about it and wondering why I'm taking a picture. But we go in, and there's no one in the restaurant portion. Everybody's at the bar. To her defense, I didn't see if there were any kids there. There could have been kids at the bar. I'm not sure. But there was no one sitting, ordering anything in the restaurant portion. So we sit down. And we look at the menu, waitress drops off the menus, and she comes back 10 minutes later. Service was okay. And by the way, I'm not knocking the Anchor Room. They're under new management now. They seriously are. This is the old Anchor Room. So if you're planning to go, I'm sure it's fine. But the waitress comes back, and we figure out what kind of pizza we want. And we try to order it, and she said, just to let you know, we're not doing any pizzas tonight because we ran out of cheese. I mean, this is the House of Pizza. You would think they would have anticipated that. So we were really depressed. And I think she saw it in our eyes. But she said, listen, if you want pizza, we can go heavy on the sauce. We do have some Parmesan cheese. And we're like, I don't know. How are you going to do that with Parmesan cheese? And they said, well, if it's good, we'll name it after you. So I thought, now we're talking. It's got my attention now. And so we said, okay, we're gonna try it. Long story short, I'm the intelligence community CIO. I can't have a nasty pizza named after me. It wasn't that good. But what it did highlight when it comes to IT is you got to do the basics right? I've never gone into a restaurant wondering where the ingredients come from and whether or not the anchor room has a dairy farm behind it. But what she said was, she did offer to run the Food Lion and go buy more cheese. Literally, that was the solution to this problem. I wasn't sure that was the best solution. I was just willing to try out the Parmesan, but it wasn't good. But it highlights the importance of getting the basics right. And when we say basics in terms of cybersecurity, it is your basic hygiene. Where we say most issues are not technology issues, they're cultural issues, that is true here when it comes to cybersecurity. To be able to change, you have to be able to influence. And to have that, you have to have the basics down right. The basics of refreshing your IT. The basics of reporting your incidents to the right place. And this is one other element that I want to highlight. That if your infrastructure isn't maintained, if it isn't healthy, if you have an incident, you don't call me to come get your car if you lost it in the prior example. You would normally call the police. Luckily, we didn't end that incident. But you have to know where to report it to. And I think this is an example of highlighting if you don't have the foundational cybersecurity principles in your environment, then you can't operate. And that's where we truly need to focus. And as I say foundational infrastructure and the policies and the processes, it's also making sure you have the proper oversight. And most recently, the president signed out National Security Presidential Memorandum 11, which defines national security systems. It includes 3 chairs, one being myself, the other the Department of War CIO, the other the federal CIO, and then the 4th member of it being the national manager. Across all of us, we have defined what national security systems are, but also are mandating a federal cyber center oversight. And for the Department of War, that's been DCDC through DISA, Rogers' organization. For the intelligence community, that is our Security Coordination Center. And we are now reviving the Security Coordination Center to be more than just a federal element of sharing threats and reporting on vulnerabilities. We are now expanding the oversight of the SCC, not just to IC elements, but to industry, as well as non-Title 50 partners. And this is a change that I have made as ICCIO of designating the Security Coordination Center as a service of common concern to all of us. And as part of the service of common concern, it includes expanding our inspection program. EP mentioned the JWICS inspection programs which we have in place today. These are now being expanded to industry and the non-Title 50 agencies as well. So we can ensure that we are doing the basics right in our environment. Just like the anchor room should have cheese if it's going to specialize in pizza, our community needs to do the foundational cybersecurity if we're really going to support missions and do this at speed and scale, like we've been discussing. So we had our pizza, we left, and on the way out, I took a picture of what you can see there on the right. Does anybody know what that is? It's a cigarette machine. So this is where I'm going to highlight culture and where we need to go. So how many of you drink coffee? Just by a show of hands, how many of you drink coffee or have had coffee this morning? Almost everyone in the room. I would say probably 75% of you in the room raised your hand. Now, how many of you smoke? Actually, just the one person from Hopewell. I'm not even kidding. If I would have asked that question 30 years ago, about 75% of you would have raised your hand. If I would have asked that question 20 years ago, about a quarter of you would have raised your hand. If I asked that question today, less than 5% of you would raise your hand. And one of the most impactful policies and actions that the federal government has ever put in place to change culture has been with smoking. And how did they do that? They added friction. And the way they added friction was by, one, making it harder to access. They took the machines out of the stores, out of the restaurants, and they restricted access by also raising the age limit. Right there you can see on the machine, it says you have to be 21 years old to use this machine, or under 18, no tobacco. They're kind of catching up. They're figuring it out. But nonetheless, they're trying their best. But the federal government said, if you're under 18, you can't smoke. I think the Anchor Room went a step further by doing $5 in quarters only, but that's not directed by the federal government. But also what they did is they made it more expensive. They taxed cigarettes. They taxed tobacco. And what it resulted is what you have today, to where it's almost taboo to smoke. In fact, as we just saw in this brief exercise, most of you, none of you, except for one person, raised their hand. And so how do we begin to change the culture in the federal government when it comes to cybersecurity? And this is where we need to add friction. And we add friction through zero trust, as we've mentioned. Now, when I came in this position, zero trust really has become synonymous with cybersecurity. It just means cyber in general. We never really defined what it was. And so what we've begun to do with Davey Delore, our new IC CISO, is we've redefined what zero trust means for the IC. And when we say that, one, it's getting our identity right. Today, across agencies and across the federal government, we do not have a unified identity system. And when I say an identity system, a birth certificate of sorts. Not just for individuals, users, not just for devices, but as we head into this new era of AI, and we're already late on this, for the agents themselves, the AI agents. If users and devices are going to request and store and manipulate and process data, so will AI agents. And the challenge we have is that this new realm of AI has completely spun zero trust on its head, where we went from a model of least privileged access or no access to now give a model, an agent, everything it needs to be operating effectively. Those are two different things. And the only way that we're going to be successful in that is if we start with a common identity system. And so what we've established within ICCIO and through the ICCIO Council is developing, and we've invested in this through the D&I last year for our FY27 build, is investing in developing an enterprise service for identity management. And so we will begin piloting tools and testing tools in our operational environments this fall as we head into FY27. But identity alone is not going to solve that challenge. We also have to look at the policy enforcement of those identities, meaning how do we actually ensure not only that individuals, devices, and agents are restricted from only the data that they need and no more than what they need, but also how do we deliver data to where it needs to go? We tend to think of cybersecurity as friction prohibiting a function from occurring. But in reality, if we do zero trust how we've defined it, which is getting your identity down and doing fine-grained entitlements to get data exactly where it needs to go to the individuals and the functions that need it, it becomes a key mission enabler. And so we have to flip our paradigm in that regard as well. And so zero trust for us has been redefined as identity and policy enforcements of fine-grained attributes. That is how we are defining zero trust in the intelligence community, and that will be one of our newest services of common concern this year. So let's talk about services of common concern for a second. This past year, also one of the priorities coming in as ICCIO was looking at efficiencies and where we need to gain efficiencies across the intelligence community. We've done a lot of work within the cloud environment, as I mentioned, over the past 15 years, where we have C2E as an example of a service, which is our front door for cloud, enterprise architecture, enterprise infrastructure, the application layer. It is our front door for the IC. Across, we have 16 services of common concern that we oversee in ICCIO that are executed by the ICCIO elements across the community. Coming in, we did a complete review and revalidation, really a zero-based review of not only where are SOCs today, services of common concern, and how well are they performing, but where do we have gaps? What do we need? And so we were able to look at those and augment the capabilities where they needed to be augmented. And this ranges from everything from network services, such as JWICS as a service of common concern, to identity management, to where we have several service providers, NGA today, CIA, NSA, but then also financial systems. And so when we think about the gaps of where we need to integrate together, We are now looking at how does enterprise architecture fit in and where are those new services of common concern that we need. And our chief architect, Elise Bessiker, who's in the crowd, has defined 3 new architectures that the community needs to really excel in integration, especially as we enter this new age of AI. One, EP mentioned it, which is DevSecOps. How do we build the right foundational infrastructure to do our development and deploy resources across the IC enterprise? Today, we do that very differently right now within agencies, but we all use the same tools. How do we do that in common to aid in the reciprocity of these capabilities in the community? The second is financial systems, like I mentioned. This is an area ripe for automation within the IC. We have different systems within each IC element now, and those manually speak together for the most part. What we're looking at within OD&I is a replacement to the legacy system we have right now, which is IRIS, but then automating the feeds that inform that IRIS system. And Elise and her team in our Chief Architect office is defining what that financial management architecture needs to do now. Again, we're looking at architecture as step 1, because if we define the capability needs and the requirements and the designs wrong, and we figure that out in the operational state, just like the examples EP mentioned, likely it's going to be 100 times the cost and time to fix that, and we can't afford to do that. The third is in human capital systems, and this is where we're partnered with DIA, NSA, CIA, and others, to where how do we develop a human capital architecture to where we can integrate across the community to be able to manage our most precious resource, which is our people. And if you look at where we are competing around the world in AI today, it is not in the technology necessarily. And look at it in industry right now. It's in the people, it's in the skill sets. It's bringing the right skills in to develop purpose-built models to deploy. And the only way you're going to do that is by managing your hiring and your allocation of those personnel resources across the community more effectively. And so our team within ICCIO is developing the blueprint for how the human capital architecture needs to be defined and integrate together. And then the third is zero trust, of course, like we spoke about. We have many different identity systems today, and Davey Delore, our IC CISO, along with Elise Bessiger, is defining what that architecture needs to look like for zero trust so our cybersecurity services can keep pace and integrate together. But let's also talk about what we have mentioned many times and many view as an inhibitor to accelerating technology, especially in the security realm, which is ATOs. If there is one complaint that I've heard of as a CIO that never changes from my time at DIA to where I am now at the OD&I as the ICCIO, it's that our ATO process is broken. And I think at the end of the day, we all want our information, our networks to be as secure as they possibly can. We all agree on that objective. And like I tell our team, it's just a matter of how do we get to that objective. Within ICCIO, we've undertaken a few recent changes in partnership with IC CISO to really reduce the friction in these areas. One is a common repository of bodies of evidence, something simple that we can do that we already stood up this year. And we've worked with every ICCIO to be able to expose what the body of evidence are. So if we have a particular device or an application, we can adopt the controls that have already been validated to be able to have that reciprocity in our environment. The next step that we're going to focus on this year is automating that body of evidence library that we've now created. And a big portion of this is investments in inventory discovery, and then also business process flow for how those authorizations take place, so we can adopt the findings from those. The second big thing, and EP mentioned, RMF, which he apparently hates. There's thousands of controls in there, 500 that are generally applied within the IC. One thing that we have sponsored and a directive that I've signed out of ICCIO, which we've actually deployed, is our Express ATO process. And a lot of that I learned from my time at DIA of our ATO at Hello effort. And NGA had something similar that was called ATO in a day. It doesn't rhyme as well, but you get the point. But this is defining the minimum number of controls that we need to deploy. the handful of controls that we need to be able to get operational, and then let the rest catch up later that are more administrative. And we've deployed this in many different areas, particularly within OD&I, with the integration of OD&I CIO within my organization. We've been able to experiment and deploy with technologies before we field them to the broader IC. And as part of that, we've integrated this Express ATO process. And we're mandating that this be applied across all environments within the IC at the TSSCI level. So those are some big initiatives that we've taken on this year to help ease our transition as we get into the era of AI. Now, the final question to talk about is, where does AI fit in? And another lesson I've learned with my kids. So the great thing about having kids is that they've introduced me, especially teenagers, into new activities that I would never have done alone on myself. So one is pickleball. My older daughter introduced us to pickleball, which I thought was just more of like a lazy man's tennis. Turns out it's actually pretty active, and it's fun. We play pickleball now because of my daughter. The other thing that we've started playing is chess. And so my younger daughter introduced me to chess. I didn't know how to play chess at all. Checkers I had down, chess I had no idea. So we started playing. She taught me what all the pieces were, what all the moves were, and she would beat me every single time. And I think you always want your kids to do better than you in anything in life. But I wasn't willing to have her beat me in chess. So I started watching videos on YouTube. And when you watch videos on YouTube, what you'll see is the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, super fast. They're moving at lightning speed. Fast forward to try to figure out, okay, let me keep pace a little bit with this. Fast forward, and they're just sitting there staring at each other, the two players. Does anyone know the reason why that is? Well, there's something called the book. And the book documents every single chess move that is possible on a chessboard that we know about. And I stress that what we know about because there are 10 to the power of 78 chess moves possible on a board. That is more than the number of atoms in the universe. Meaning, the reason why they get later in the video to this place that they're just staring at each other is because they've entered this white space. It's a space we've never seen before. And when we think about AI and the application with intelligence, it's not about what do we automate. There are absolutely opportunities to automate both within the intelligence enterprise and within our business functions. No question. But what we can't seek to do is to replace the critical thinking that is required for intelligence analysis with AI automation. We've learned this lesson before. So go back to 2009. Out of Rio de Janeiro, Air France was taking off. Took off, reached 35,000 feet. At 35,000 feet, the engines froze because of ice crystals. The pilots, who were trained, and this was during the height of cockpit automation, made a crucial mistake. So if you imagine yourself in a plane, the plane is nose diving into the ocean. I think a pilot and a non-pilot would have two different answers. So I'll ask EP. If your plane is nose diving into the ocean, what do? Do you pull the nose up or do you push the nose down of the plane? I'm praying. He's praying. EP's not doing anything. He froze. General Adams, you were a pilot, I think, right? You said that in aviator. If the plane is going down and the auto thrust is turned off, the autopilot has turned off in this case, you are now manually controlling the plane and it is nose diving down. What do? Do you try to pull up or do you go down?
It depends what altitude you're at, but naturally you want to try to pull up.
Yeah, you want to try to pull up. That is the instinctive reaction. And that instinct is what the pilots did. They try to pull up. But when your plane is nose diving, you go down to get the lift in order to come up. And that was the fatal flaw in that example. And they relied on automation so much that they forgot the fundamentals of how to fly a plane. And that's what we can't fall into the same trap in when it comes to intelligence analysis or collection. The AI agents are an aid to doing that. But the real value in AI is understanding when we get to that white space in intelligence, the events that we've never seen before. So we use our most precious resource of people to then determine what is actually going on. If we forget how to critically think, there will be an intelligence failure. And just like we all many of us relied on airlines to get here, I don't think any of us knocked on the cabin door and encouraged the pilot to fail fast and fail often. That was not our strategy here. We want our pilot to do the right thing the first time. And the same holds true for intelligence analysis and collection. We have to do the right thing right the first time. We don't get a second chance in intelligence. And that is where AI fits into the function of intelligence, in my opinion. Now, to wrap it up in terms of our priorities of where we've landed in the intelligence community, workforce experience, as I said, is number one. Finding the right people with the right talent for the right work. If you look at the AI race right now, particularly with China, our biggest risk is acquiring the right talent to get us where we need to go. Within the United States, and we can see this within the federal government, our biggest resource that we have in our workforce, if you look at leadership, they're lawyers, attorneys. Within China, their leadership are engineers. And we have to change that. And workforce is critical. Within the ODNI, we have stood up what is called IC Jobs. IC Jobs is a platform like USA Jobs, but on the high side on the TSSCI network, to where we can have our staff get their resumes out there in a classified manner, and our job posts can also go out in a classified manner. So we can match the right people to the right job. That is an initiative we took on this year out of ICCIO, and we officially launched it a few weeks ago. NGA and NRO are some of the first adopters of that. DIA soon, I'm sure. Second, foundational infrastructure and architecture. As we stated, we have to have the right architectures in place from the get-go. If we wait till the end, when it's an O&M and deployment, we've failed. Partner integration. We talked a lot about partner integration in the previous panels. This is not only with international partners, which I oversee as part of the ICCIO with agencies such as NGA and DIA providing services like StoneGhost, but it's also with industry. And as we've gotten into Project Glasswing and our deployment of AI and understanding the threats, we are also bringing together those industry partners to help us interpret the threats and what the mitigations need to be. Acquisition efficiency should come as no surprise to anyone. One of our highest priorities within the ODNI to ensure we are building shared services across the community and not silos of technology capabilities. We do this not only through the services of common concern, but enterprise licensing. Just like the services of common concern, we have almost 24 enterprise licenses to where agencies can buy into the existing capabilities that are on contract throughout the community and not have to spend the time to reinvestigate what tools are available. And we've made that as a shared resource for the entire IC, and I will put a plug in that this fall we are also having a SOC and Enterprise License Summit hosted by NGA, thank you NGA, to where we're going to expose these to the community, and we're also inviting other industry partners to demonstrate their capabilities so we can expand the application of enterprise services. And then finally, cybersecurity oversight and optimization. Incident response is key, understanding our environment is key, knowing our inventory to be able to protect it is key, and it all boils down to how we've redefined zero trust, of making sure we have shared identities across our enterprise and we have the right entitlements in place to restrict access where needed, but to allow access across the enterprise where that's needed as well. So again, I want to thank DIA, I want to thank EP for inviting me here. It is a pleasure coming back to speak at DoDIIS. It's a relief not having to come back as the DIA CIO because now my time is over. I can just go walk around. EP is going to be busy for the next several days. But this is an opportunity. We have brought our entire ICCIO leadership team here as well because our ability to work towards and enhance our capabilities in each of these priority areas comes down to conferences like this and the integration that we have across the federal government and industry. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to meeting with many of you.
Hey, Doug, thank you very much for that. It is really a treat for us to have you here at DoDIIS as the ICCIO, particularly with your experience as a former DIA CIO. It is helpful. And it's also very helpful, and I personally want to thank you for all the guidance and top cover that you provide from D&I. As the D&I or ICCIO, you really understand what's needed in terms of what we need to do to keep the digital architecture moving forward, so thank you. And at this time, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. And that speaker is the U.S. Spacecom Commander. General Whiting has been the Spacecom Commander since January of 24, 2.5 years. Which he took over after spending 4 years as the first commander of the Space Ops Command. He is a true visionary, one who had built an organization from the ground up that trains, equips, integrates Guardians into each of the combatant commands. You know, as we look at the technologies and we talk about the things that we need, every single capability that we talk about here at DoDIIS relies heavily on space, and that's often overlooked. Whether you're talking about position, navigation, and timing, and the ability of space to keep our defensive systems synchronized, or you talk about the satellite links that communicate and connect and provide comms, sensitive comms, all around the globe, or whether you talk about the sensors that we deploy to do our collection, that provide warning, and when missiles leave the ground, OPIR, that type of thing. Each of those capabilities in space is a contested asset, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And our adversaries, as we watch them, are working to degrade those capabilities, to disable those capabilities, and to, in their minds, destroy our critical capability, our critical center of gravity in space. You know, General Whiting has a unique vantage. He built the SPOC from the ground up. He understands how to successfully and operationally turn new capability into operational realities. And so I'd like to offer a warm welcome as we welcome the commander of U.S. Spacecom, General Stephen Whiting, to the stage for a presentation.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good to see you. Well, good morning, or should I say good afternoon. That's always a little bit of a trap when your speech straddles 12 o'clock. But I do want to say thank you to DIA and specifically to Lieutenant General Adams for being such an incredible mission partner for us at U.S. Space Command. That's in our day-to-day mission that I'll talk about today, but also in our move to Huntsville, Alabama. Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate the partnership. Now, you should know that the road to me speaking at this gathering goes a lot farther back than the invitation that arrived a couple of months ago. You might say our shared interest began with a French balloon in the Napoleonic era. One of the most deeply integrated partnerships in our government between national intelligence and military space, between your organizations and mine. You might say our deep partnership began in principle over 2 centuries ago. In 1794, the French Aerostatic Corps deployed a hydrogen balloon high above a battle against a coalition of Austrians and the Dutch. The balloon was named the Enterprising One. It was the birth of aerial reconnaissance. They waved signal flags and dropped written messages in weighted bags to pass intelligence to the ground crew. While some questioned the intelligence gained, the psychological impact was undeniable. This enormous floating French eye in the sky demoralized the Austrians and the Dutch. And of course, in our own Civil War, the Union Army Balloon Corps operated from the outset of the conflict, led by Thaddeus S.C. Lowe, who was appointed Chief Aeronaut. What a cool title. That intelligence instinct for the American military to hold the highest ground would continue. It took some time for technology to grow, but by the mid-1950s, the U-2 was flying above 70,000 feet. The intelligence gained helped debunk the bomber and the missile gaps. But when the Soviet Union's air defenses were able to shoot down Francis Gary Powers' U-2 in 1960, The nation needed to look even higher for the best vantage point. Thus, the National Reconnaissance Office was established in 1961, cementing when national intelligence and military space really came together. From its inception, the National Reconnaissance Office was staffed by both military and civilian intelligence professionals. While the Air Force, the CIA, and the Navy operated different subprograms for some time, military space and intelligence have shared hardware and research and development efforts since the 1960s. As the kids say, we cooked together during Desert Storm, often called the world's first space war, and we've gotten closer and closer over time. The National Space Defense Center, jointly manned by the NRO, the IC, and U.S. Space Command, is a shared operational center where military guardians and joint personnel from all the services, as well as intelligence analysts, work together to defend our nation's orbital architecture. We've grown so close over time that I suspect we have a lot of the same experiences. I don't talk to a lot of audiences where I pretty much know that you, like me, have gone home to your family and you just crack open a jargon fire hose and they look at you like you've got an extra nose growing out of your forehead. But I know for at least some of you that's just Tuesday. Having worked with intelligence professionals for so long, I know we do often have to change the way we talk sometimes, to code switch, to make sure we all understand each other. Like in Project Hail Mary. In it, Ryan Gosling plays Ryland Grace, a junior high school science teacher who wakes up on a spaceship light years away from Earth. He encounters another spacecraft and meets an alien he calls Rocky, because Rocky basically looks like a dog-sized rock spider. Rocky has no face and speaks in musical chords, and then they figure out how to communicate. Here's a short clip.
That is a great question. You know what? Try this.
Why is a school teacher in space? Question.
No.
Don't like that voice.
Can't unhear it, really.
Scary.
Let's try this.
Ooh.
Nope.
Why is a school teacher in space?
No need to even continue. Good, nope.
Why is a school teacher in space? What's so funny? Question.
Why is a school teacher in space?
I mean...
It has charm, but no.
Why is a school teacher in space?
Why is a school teacher in space?
That's not bad.
I like.
All right. And in answer to your question, I have no idea what I'm doing in space. I don't remember.
Now, of course, you all get that that's a metaphor for us, military space and intelligence professionals figuring out how to communicate to save the world. But I'm also claiming dibs on Ryan Gosling as a stand-in for the commander of U.S. Space Command in his next movie. Something I can assure you my wife would be very happy about. And by the way, you intel folks would make excellent rock alien sidekicks. But kidding aside, as deep as our partnership has been, I think we've evolved to want the exact same thing. Faster, better, more resilient long-range kill chains. A kill chain isn't exactly a new concept. It's an old idea that's grown over time as our weapons have also grown in range. If you squint, you can just see the kill chain outlines in John Boyd's OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, and act. A process with steps that counseled whoever can cycle through the loop the fastest wins the dogfight. Today, thinkers like Christian Brose in his book, The Kill Chain, have expanded that concept into modern tech-enabled long-range kill chains and even kill webs. We aren't just trying to win a dogfight anymore. We are trying to find, track, and neutralize highly mobile, heavily defended targets across thousands of miles of ocean and terrain and in space, all before our adversaries can attack us. Here's the hard truth that brings us together. Space is the keystone arch in today's long-range kill chain. Over-the-horizon targeting depends on space. To show you what I mean, let's walk through a classic F2T2 EA kill chain. Find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess. But instead of a dry list of acronyms, let's walk through a hypothetical threat scenario. Imagine a rogue state deploys a next-generation mobile anti-ship missile system. Let's call it the VKR-2. It is designed to sink our aircraft carriers, and intelligence says it just rolled out of a mountain bunker and it's hiding somewhere on the land. We have to take it out before it kills one of our carriers. Here's how the space and intel communities come together to make that happen. Find. First, we need to know where the VKR-2 is active. Our overhead persistent infrared satellites, or OPIR, and space-based signals intelligence satellites, or SIGINT, are watching. They detect a split-second radar emission or the thermal flash of the VKR-2's engine powering up. We have found an anomaly. Fix. Next, we need the exact coordinates. We cue our electro-optical satellites and synthetic aperture radar systems. The SAR cuts right through the cloud cover to get the precise location of the launcher. We've fixed the target. Track. The VKR-2 starts moving down a dirt road to avoid being hit. This is where our low Earth orbit ISR constellations come in. A swarm of small satellites passes target custody from one to the next, keeping unblinking eyes on the vehicle as it moves. We've tracked the VKR-2. Target. Now we need to get that data to the shooter. Satellite communications securely beam these precise moving coordinates from the intelligence apparatus directly to the combatant command and its components, and then down to a strike aircraft already in the air. We've targeted the threat. Engage. The pilot drops a precision munition. How does that bomb know exactly where to go? Positioning, navigation, and timing, provided by our GPS constellation, guides the weapon through the atmosphere to hit the exact grid coordinate. We've engaged. Assess. Finally, the smoke clears. Another satellite passes overhead, snapping high-resolution imagery to perform post-strike battle damage assessment. We can now assess that the VKR-2 is destroyed. Without space, this entire sequence falls apart. The carrier is blind, the jet is deaf, and the bomb is dumb. The chairman recently said space was a first mover in Operation Epic Fury, and that's true. The reality is space doesn't merely move first, it's the keystone on which our entire long-range kill chain depends. Now that's a powerful tool, but of course there's a challenge. Our modern kill chains are built on an aged keystone. At first glance, it appears we are running a 21st century modern warfighting concept on top of a Cold War legacy system. Many of those legacy space systems were built decades ago to watch for bombers or ICBM launches and then report back to the president. They were not built to rapidly track a VKR-2 in real time and feed data directly to a pilot in seconds, all while being jammed, lased, or physically attacked. To some observers, it's a simple problem with a simple solution. We can't expect a 21st century concept to run for long on an out-of-date system. There's a reason Uber isn't picking people up with streetcars. There's a reason DoorDash doesn't depend on the Pony Express. Yet at times we are still expecting Cold War space systems, old concepts of operation, or multi-day intelligence processes to meet the demands of a modern split-second long-range kill chain. It simply won't work for long. Before we talk about a solution, I think we need a little context. As intelligence and defense professionals, you might sometimes look up at our space architecture and wonder why so many organizations are involved. Why do we have multiple satellite forces? The split between Title 50 intelligence, like the National Reconnaissance Office, and Title 10 military platforms. As fractured as that seems, let's look at the rest of the Department of War. Why does the Navy, tongue-in-cheek, have its own army, called the Marine Corps? For that matter, why does the U.S. military have at least 4 separate air forces? Or why does the Army operate more ships than the Navy does? And specific to many of you in this room, why are there 18 different intelligence agencies? The answer is that the Earth is an infinitely complex place, as is the government and military of the world's greatest superpower. Over decades and decades, we developed highly specialized forces to solve specific tactical problems, one fight at a time. We built the Marines to solve the bloody intersection of land and sea. We made the 10th Mountain Division to fight up and over European Alps in the Second World War. And we've established the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command for similar reasons. When you solve problems this way, as decades pass, layers accumulate, competitors react, and gaps and seams can emerge because our adversaries will never stop searching for them. When that happens, we have to create mechanisms that harmonize what exists so it can be greater than the sum of its parts. That's why the Joint Force was created. It's why we created the Nuclear Single Integrated Operations Plan. And it's why the Director of National Intelligence position was established. What we need in space right now is no different than what our military has done over and over again throughout history, integrating old and new to face a threat that is no longer emerging. The threat from China and Russia in space is real. It's present, and it is specifically arrayed against the United States space systems. Many of you would be familiar with Rear Admiral J.C. Wiley and his book, Military Strategy, A General Theory of Power Control. He served in the Second World War and wrote this book during the Cold War. Among other things, he pointed out two very different kinds of strategies that may be used in war. One was sequential, featuring a series of visible, discrete steps, each depending upon that which preceded it. The other was cumulative, the less perceptible, minute accumulation of little items piling one on top of the other until at some unknown point, the mass of accumulated actions may be large enough to be critical. Think island hopping and aerial bombing campaigns. Wiley noted these were not incompatible, and they are not exclusive of one another. He wrote that, quote, our strategic success in the future may be measured in great part by the skill with which we are able to balance our sequential and cumulative efforts toward the most effective and least costly attainment of our goals. I think we can apply Wiley to where we are today in military space. Just substitute modern and legacy for sequential and cumulative. Our strategic success may very well be measured by the skill with which we balance our modern and legacy capabilities. Right now, we have a sub-optimized mix of modern and legacy capabilities. We have to fight with a hybrid architecture of new assets and procedures purpose-built for today's fight, alongside legacy assets and procedures stretched to their limit for today's reality, alongside yet other legacy assets and procedures that are increasingly irrelevant to our most dangerous scenarios. We need to get the mix right now, because what I call the fight for connectivity isn't just coming, it's here. For one potent example, look at the persistent, grinding electronic warfare happening right now in Ukraine. The action-reaction dynamic to stay connected on the battlefield is moving at lightning speed. About an hour before Russian forces launched their invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, Russia used a cyber weapon to attack a commercial SATCOM company, Viasat. Their goal was to wipe out Ukrainian command and control at the most critical moment. While the Russians knocked out about 45,000 Viasat modems, they also took down 6,000 wind turbines in Germany and tens of thousands of civilian customers across Europe. Users as far as Middle East and North Africa experienced terminal failures as well, an impact felt across 3 continents. And maybe we should feel fortunate that in attacking a contiguous neighbor, the Russians limited collateral damage to only 3 continents. 4 days later, the first commercial Starlink terminals were rushed into Ukraine. Starlink provided a rapidly deployable, survivable C2 system that allowed Ukrainian forces to stay in the fight. And in early March, 2,000 more arrived, and by April, roughly 5,000 terminals were online in Ukraine. Since then, EW jamming has progressed significantly on both sides. We have seen incredible counter-EW adaptations, like combat drones flying with spools of fiber optic wire trailing behind them, some up to 30 miles, just to maintain a physical connection that cannot be jammed. If this is what the fight for connectivity looks like today, just imagine the scale of the fight tomorrow when 2 great powers might be on the field. The war in Ukraine has put a giant exclamation point on something we've known for some time. Space is a warfighting domain, and we're going to have to fight for connectivity. Without space, we can't shoot, we can't move, we can't communicate, at least certainly not the way we need to. Our adversaries know this, and they will attack and target our space capabilities in an attempt to stall, blind, and render ineffective our joint and combined force. In response to this challenge, I want to tell you a little about how U.S. Space Command thinks about our role in the joint fight. Our duty is to deliver on 3 no-fail moral imperatives. Number 1, we must deliver space capabilities to the joint force and the nation across all levels of conflict. Number 2, we must defend our space capabilities against all threats now arrayed against them. And number 3, we must help protect the joint force and the nation from space-enabled attacks by our enemies. At U.S. Space Command, our staff relentlessly focuses on what we can do to win this fight for connectivity. We've seen the future battlefield playing out in small towns all across eastern Ukraine, and we know we need to change. Not long ago, at our command's annual leadership offsite, we talked about how this problem isn't limited to the battlefield. Other examples help us understand the challenge. Over in the business world, they've seen a similar scenario so many times they've got a name for it: the innovator's dilemma. At that event, we talked about Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen's writing on the subject. The late professor pointed out that sometimes market-leading companies choose to sustain successful, previously innovative products while neglecting disruptive innovations on the rise. Market leaders can become satisfied because their customers are happy and they're at the top, so why worry? They're so satisfied that they don't feel threatened by the rising competitor's innovative approach, so that over time, the rising competitor overtakes the market. Think of film cameras losing out to digital cameras, and then digital cameras losing out to smartphones with cameras. Think of horse carriages overwhelmed by Henry Ford's mass automobile production, let alone the horse cavalry losing all relevance due to the armored tank. Or, back to Ukraine, it may be that geosynchronous-based satellite communications have become upended by small, inexpensive, interconnected satellites in a proliferated low Earth orbit. To us, the innovator's dilemma sounded a little like U.S. legacy military space platforms, purpose-built for success in the Cold War and part of the world's greatest military space enterprise built for that era, yet not well suited to a new era of space competition. We've never had a day without space, so it can feel like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we know that's misleading because our current opponents have actively fielded capabilities to disrupt, degrade, deny, and defeat our ability to use space. One potential escape from the innovator's dilemma comes from Amazon. CEO Jeff Bezos' 2016 letter to shareholders was, in a word, remarkable. Here was a corporate giant doubling down on what he called the day one mentality. He counseled that the entire company should act like they were in the very first day of Amazon's business, to experiment, to accept failure, to prioritize customer needs and wants, and above all, to outwit and outfight disruptive innovations coming up in the market. And it seems that mentality's borne fruit. Amazon's still quite a company a decade on. The lesson is that market leaders must be prepared to adjust to a changing competitive landscape. If you don't disrupt yourself to meet the moment, your opponents will. Even when there is no obvious or loud demand for change, sometimes the biggest risk can be to play it safe and stick with the status quo. At U.S. Space Command, we know the status quo isn't good enough. We know we need to change to get from kill chain now to kill chain next. So where do we start? We start with building the better keystone we need for the kill chain we need. That's why we were so happy and enthusiastic to see President Trump's Executive Order 14369, ensuring American space superiority. This executive order calls for the United States to, among other things, ensure we can detect, characterize, and counter the threats now arrayed against our space systems from very low Earth orbit through cislunar space, including the placement of nuclear weapons on orbit. Additionally, it directs the creation of a new, responsive and adaptive national security space architecture, including an associated implementation plan. Said succinctly, the President's executive order places an obvious and loud demand signal on the United States space enterprise to adapt because of the changes which are happening in the space landscape and the threat landscape. It's time to deliver this new responsive and adaptive national security space architecture attuned to the realities of today's space domain. A domain in which our opponents have built a suite of counter-space capabilities to hold our satellites at risk in all orbital regimes. A domain in which a non-maneuvering satellite is a static and predictable target. A domain in which agility and resilience, spatially, spectrally, and cognitively are essential to survival and successful mission accomplishment. At U.S. Space Command, we've come to the firm conclusion that we need to be able to execute all 7 joint functions: command and control, intelligence, movement and maneuvers, fires, protection, sustainment, and information. We have to be able to do those in space if we are going to be successful. Our space assets need to shoot, move, and communicate just like the rest of the Joint Force. So our space assets can enable the Joint Force to shoot, move, and communicate and prevent our adversaries from doing so. Space needs to fight like the Joint Force to empower the Joint Force's ability to fight and undermine our adversaries' ability to do so. Let's consider sustained space maneuver. Space assets are typically limited by fuel and the other consumables they launch with. Today, because we cannot replenish our fuel once on orbit, figuring out how to husband our fuel becomes an overriding consideration in how we operate our satellites. More important than warfighting considerations like selecting the proper movement and maneuver for mission success. In the modern space environment we find ourselves in, we know we need the ability to actively avoid threats and maneuver to gain a position of advantage over our adversaries. A hallmark of why our Joint Force is so successful is that maneuver and sustainment advantage we enjoy over our adversaries in all other domains. We must also instill these same advantages into the responsive and adaptive national security space architecture we must now deliver if we are to remain the world's best military space force. And maybe the most critical characteristic in this new responsive and adaptive national security space architecture is that survivability matters at least as much as performance. In space, there is no safe harbor. We can't dig a trench or build a shield. Our satellites are consistently in or predictably in our opponent's weapons engagement zones. And we can build the most high-performing, exquisite satellites in human history, but if they depend on fragile supporting infrastructure, their performance will drop to 0 on the first day of the next war. Space survivability isn't just a good to have or a nice to have, it is a need to have, especially if we want to win the next war for connectivity. Now let's talk about building a bigger, better bridge between Title 10 and Title 50. Of course, it's true that federal law makes that distinction between these separate entities, but I think we both have good reasons to make the relationship even closer. All our space systems, military and intelligence, are in the same foxhole together. It was once the case that these separate systems worked in parallel from a safe sanctuary in space to support the warfighter and policymaker. But we now face the same threats. It doesn't matter if a satellite's got a big sign that says Title 50 or Title 10 out on the side. Our opponents could care less, and our systems will be targeted regardless. The more we collaborate between military and intelligence systems in space, not only will we be more effective, but we'll get more efficient because we'll find ways to avoid suboptimal or unnecessary redundancies. Maybe most importantly, we'll eliminate an exploitable seam for our enemies to target. Before we move on, I want to tell you a quick anecdote. I heard about a guy who ordered a medium rare steak at a restaurant in Paris. The server explained to him that the kitchen prepares its steak only rare or medium. So our guy politely suggested to the server, ask the chef to leave the steak on the grill for somewhere between the time it takes to make it rare and the time it takes to make it medium. The server and the chef were not amused. The point is, we don't have to accept either or choices. And I told you that French story to get your mind back to that other French anecdote I mentioned earlier. Remember the enterprising one, the French aerostatic corps, the hydrogen balloon that created an unblinking eye over a European battlefield as far back as the 1790s. The French did not accept a false choice between ground-limited intelligence and no intelligence. They looked at the world as it was and used reason and common sense to demand better by eating off the menu. We don't have to accept status quo either, and we won't. because we can see now that space is woven into every step of the F2T2 EA cycle, as well as our long-range kill chains. We can see now from Ukraine and Iran that space is truly a warfighting domain. We can see now the innovator's dilemma and how to break free from it. We can see now how we can get from kill chain now to kill chain next, and we can see that next starts now. None of these seem so hard, at least not as tough as picking a voice for a faceless rock alien. But if someone bumps into Ryan Gosling, please tell him he really should have gone with Morgan Freeman's voice. Mr. Freeman is the GOAT. But I do appreciate, General Adams, again, your kind invitation, and I really have enjoyed being with you here today, and I hope you all have a great rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Whiting. We are now heading into a lunch break. Please take this time to visit the exhibits and return by 13:30 for the Strategic Horizons Defense Intelligence Agency Executive Panel.